Welcome to Zambition, the channel on which we engage in dialogue with leaders from across sectors and generations. Greetings and welcome to this special edition of Zambition. It is special because it's an opportunity for us to reflect, commemorate one of Africa's greatest leaders. A few days ago, the sad news was announced that Dr. Kaunda had passed on. And we are all aware that the news did not only hit Zambia, it did not only hit Africa, it's the world. And in this conversation, I have invited three distinguished leaders to help in commemorating, celebrating the leader that has passed on. And I know that for someone who was leader of a country for that length of time, we can look at his shortcomings. We can look at the great things he did. In this particular instance, we make a deliberate choice to look at the many great things he has left behind. To help us do this are Mrs. Mwanawasa, a well-known and renowned lawyer in Zambia. She has held many portfolios, but she was also legal advisor to the late president. Mrs. Zalumis has served on a number of boards over the years, and she runs her own law firm, the Dove Chambers. She was also spokesperson for the National Constitutional process. Mrs. Zalumis, welcome to Zambition.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you.
Also on the program is Dr. Mwanawasa. Needs no introduction. Our third First Lady. Mrs. Mwanawasa, like Mrs. Zalumis, is a lawyer. And she is running the practice that her husband and herself set up years back. But she also superintends the foundation that has been set up in honor of our late president, Levi Patrick Mwanawasa. Dr. Mwanawasa, welcome to Zambition.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin.
And finally, on our program today is my Lord Bishop, but also Dr. Trevor Mwamba, who is the current president of the United National Independence Party, UNIP. My Lord Bishop, welcome to Zambition.
Thank you very much, Martin.
I would like to begin this conversation by asking you, Mrs. Zalumis. We are in the period of mourning, but it's also a period of celebration of a life that many have referred to as larger than life. You had the opportunity to know and work with Dr. Kaunda very closely. How did you come to work with Dr. Kaunda?
Well, thank you, Martin. I was asked actually to take care of the legal issues of UNIP at the time when UNIP went into the opposition. And I went into politics by either default or accident. I thought I would just go and said, okay, give me the cases that you need to be, that need to be dealt with. Then I was asked that, for you to do our cases, you have to go to the Congress. And little did I know that I was actually going to face an election, So I went to the Congress. This is the first time ever that I'd gone to a political convention. And and I was told, in fact, the forms had to be completed for me because I didn't know what to put. So I said, well, I'm just a lawyer. Why don't I just get your cases? Say, no. You've got to be a member of the Central Committee. So I said, well, at that moment, I said, no. I don't want to go into politics. I said, no, but the Central Committee has to approve you, and they can only, you can only get the approval from the convention. So we went to the University of Zambia. That's where the Congress was. In UNIP, we called it Congress, not convention. And I stood as a member of the Central Committee for Legal, Political, Constitutional, and Parliamentary Affairs. And by then, I hadn't even met Dr. Kaunda. Because the people asked me, who were in the executive of the party at the time, the secretary and the treasurer, and the president by then was Msokotwane, who had not met. I knew him, but I didn't meet him officially. So I went to the Congress not knowing which side I was on. I didn't realize that there was a Msokotwane side, there was the Kaunda side. So I go to the Congress, and then I find myself that both sides were campaigning for me. Anyway, to cut the story short, I went through this election, and then I went to meet Dr. Kaunda. Then when I met Dr. Kaunda that day after the results, he said, oh, this is the young lady who used to work for ZCCM. You are the lawyer for ZCCM. So I said, yes. I said, well, I'd been meaning to meet you while I was in office, but then you were very busy. That's what he told me. So I said, oh, who would be busier than you? Anyway, that's how I met Dr. Kaunda. Then from there, we just hit it off in that it was working on a daily basis. And I had never come across such a highly organized person like him. 9 o'clock, you appeared at his residence where the office was, and we would have a meeting at 9 o'clock. And everybody had to be there at 9. And then he told us that, look, when you come at 9 o'clock, you must come dressed, ready to meet the highest and the lowest. Because I'm not going to give you time to go home and change. Then I thought, oh my God. So we come here, ready, said, yes, you might meet diplomats, you might go to a village, you might meet somebody from the civil society or somebody from government or what. So you had to be ready. And every morning, it was, it's as though he was handing over. He was teaching us the statecraft. He was teaching us how to, when you go into politics, how to meet people. He was teaching us how to be humble, how to be polite. And this is the first time ever that I was introduced to politics. So I said, well, my position reads legal, political, what Joseph Achala, as he used to say. And he said, well, politics, in fact, even in your home, there are politics. There's politics between the husband and wife, politics between the children and the parents. And when you extend that to the bigger society, what are their needs? The needs, You might say the news are not political, but they are political. The human rights are political. That then I started connecting everything. But what you are doing is that you are championing the people's needs. You are championing them for the better good of society. You are championing them in fairness and justice. If you don't do that, then there's no life. So it's an organization. You organize society in such a way that they feel that there's somebody doing things for them. So that's how I met Dr. Kaunda. Maybe the other things can come later.
I really appreciate you allowing us to walk that journey with you. I now turn to you, Dr. Mwanawasa. Although your husband, who was also our third president, His Excellency Levi Patrick Mwanawasa, did not always hold the same views with Dr. Kaunda, President Mwanawasa was determined to ensure that the first president of our country was given the rightful status. I do remember, for instance, when I helped to organize the former African Heads of State workshop on HIV and AIDS in 2007. President Mwanawasa insisted that Dr. Kaunda was the main host of the meeting, that all the visiting former heads of state were going to be received as guests of Dr. Kaunda. And I do recall another session when the University of Cambridge Executive Leadership Program asked me to invite Dr. Kaunda, who had then retired, to be guest of honor at one of their premier events. When I informed President Mwanawasa about the university's intention to pay for Dr. Kaunda's travels, President Mwanawasa said to me, "Martin, we are talking about our first president here. We will not allow, no matter how good intentioned they are, another organization to meet his travel cost. The state will." And that's what happened. Dr. Mwanawasa, did you by any chance, together with the president, talk about Dr. Kaunda's place in the history and future of Zambia? What was your couple talk on President Kaunda?
I must say that I'll try not to divulge state secrets, but to try my best and explain how that was arrived at. First of all, I want to state that President Mwanawasa met President Kaunda way back before anybody even thought that President Mwanawasa would become a president. When Kenneth Kaunda, the president, appointed him as Solicitor General. The stint was short, but it remains part of history that President Mwanawasa worked under President Kaunda at one point. Then coming to President Mwanawasa deciding to restate the stature of President Kaunda. As you know, when you're a president, you don't work alone. Of course, there were people he must have consulted, his aides, his ministers, and also it was not reflecting well as a nation that the founding president of our country was not receiving the respect and attention that he deserved. So somebody who was in President Mwanawasa's position had a responsibility and duty to do something. And in 2003, there was a special investor ceremony, specifically just for Dr. Kaunda, We know that investor ceremonies do take place in this country every year, but this one was special. It was attended by a lot of dignitaries. South Africa was represented by a minister. President Mugabe came, was there, represented Zimbabwe. President Nyoma then was president of Namibia. He was present, and several dignitaries attended that investor ceremony, which gave the recognition of President Kaunda as the founding father of our nation. And that was the beginning of everything that has followed to date up to his death. He also ensured that President Kaunda left the rented house, which was done by a citizen, and put him in a government residential house in Lusaka. And all the things that goes with the retirement of a president were put in place. But way before that, Mrs. Zalumis will remember that when President Kaunda was facing court charges, President Mwanawasa was actually part of the legal team from the private sector. And recently I came across a letter which President Mwanawasa was writing to Mrs. Zalumis, discussing the issues of legal fees which had been blown out of proportion and how it must be handled. So one day I'll be able to share with you that file. I just found it this week because when President Kaunda died, we were just now saying, where are the pieces? Where are the pictures? Let's put them together and see where we are coming from and where we are. So to sum it all, for President Mwanawasa to do what he did, President Mwanawasa believed that being a president was a tour of duty and not royalty. And therefore that tour of duty gave him the responsibility to do the right thing as a leader. And having worked under President Kaunda, I believe he learned a lot of things. So he drew a lot of strength because President Mwanawasa believed that when you are in leadership, you must always have an older person behind you. Whether that person is speaking or is just looking after your back, it is very important. And for me, I've taken that as part of a life learning journey. Doesn't matter where you are. You could be attending a wedding, you are the guest of honor, you are attending a funeral, you are the one making decisions. Look out for somebody older than you who should look after your back. So that when you're about to tumble, that older person will be able to say, young lady, young man, not this, do this, let's go this way. It's a silent voice. You may not see it physically, because these are things which are done behind the screens. And what creates, what comes out after all is said and done, is because someone has invested in such kind of people like Dr. Kaunda.
And indeed, Zambia has had many wisdom figures who I suspect through the life we are celebrating today must also be celebrated. But let me turn to you, my Lord Bishop. You are the president of UNIP. In a way, you have stepped into the shoes of Dr. Kenneth David Kaunda. Do these shoes, my Lord Bishop, feel even bigger now that Dr. Kaunda has passed on, and especially when you see how the country, Africa, and the world are responding to his death? How will this stature of KK, as we fondly refer to him, shape your leadership?
Thank you very much, Martin. Yes, our dear president was a colossal figure. within the country, and of course, as we are witnessing and hearing on the world stage. He is in the same dimensions as the former president of South Africa, Mandela. He's on the same stage as Mahatma Gandhi was in context of India. A great figure, absolutely. And of course, what we're realizing is in terms of his shoes, they were big shoes, but they were big shoes when he was alive. But now, of course, the light is being drawn to how he transcended Zambia, Africa, the world, in terms of his leadership as a man of principles, conscience, and conviction. And so, of course, having been elected as the president of UNEP, what greater example can one have? Stepping into those shoes is very humbling. It's very humbling, and at the same time, a blessing. It is a blessing in the sense that this is what one must live up to and seek to emulate the greatness of the man, which was, in my view, the shoes were the shoes of the fisherman. And what do I mean by that? These were the shoes of Christ. There's a book written in the shoes of the fisherman about St. Peter. And he was a deeply spiritual man, as we all know. He was a child of a reverend. His father was a Scottish missionary minister in Uruguay. And so God was always the focus of his life. And in that context, in terms of the bigness of the man, it was the ideals. He saw his role as one of a child of God, out to fulfill God's calling upon our lives to love God with all our heart and to love our neighbors as ourselves and to honor the humanity which God created in his image. And so in all his work, in all his doings, in all that he is as a politician, as a father, and as an artist, in all the many facets that described him, those are the shoes of a great man and which we must emulate. So yes, it's very humbling. How does it shape my leadership? It's absolutely about humility, that these shoes are not just ordinary shoes, and they're not shoes that one can easily walk in, but with the grace of God, the leading of the Holy Spirit, one can seek to live up to his faith and his ideals. And one prays that one would be able to do that.
The shoes of the fisherman. And Mrs. Alumis.
Yes.
Through Dr. Kaunda, I am of the view that we are also celebrating other men and women of his generation. In reference to the character and commitment to public service of those people who were in Keke's generation, some Zambians have said, and I picked this on social media, they don't make them like that anymore. What do you think shaped the character of the men and women who led us to independence and the first 27 years of our being a free nation?
Well, having worked with Dr. Kaunda, I came across the former leaders, those he worked with, the Grey Zulus, the Mashekes, Mrs. Kankasa, Mary Fulano, and I learned a lot from these people and all the others. Now, what struck me is the selflessness of these people. They were happy with the little that they had. And they didn't look to benefit from the state. or to be comfortable. And they asked very little, you know. They were happy, like, the late Prezulu would come and would sit with Mary Fulano, with General Masheke and what, and would be sitting lunchtime and would be having groundnuts and maize for lunch. And they were very happy. And they would be talking about the state, what they did, and what they think, the sad moments and the happy moments. They were there to give. They gave their service, not expecting anything, but to do what they fought for the good, for the betterment of the society. I mean, they talked about education and how, to them, education is a right for everybody to be educated. They talked about health, how it's a right for anybody, to be looked after. They talked about employment, and they talked about how they were forced to start all these parastatals in order to accord Zambians a chance, to be employed. They talked about the university, how they made everybody contribute, all those who were working, so that we could have a university. To me, it was one of the most satisfying moments that I spent with those people.
Where did they get that character from? I want us to know how to get that character as well. Did they ever tell you where they got it from?
They don't tell that they got this character, but I could see where they got it from. They got it from, the struggle. They would cycle. I mean, Dr. Kaunda, I remember Dr. Kaunda telling us how he cycled from Chinsali going to Isoka. And we asked him the time that he met a lion, what did he do? Because there was this rumor that he fought with a lion. And he said he had heard that if you are taller than a lion, the lion will not attack you. So he said he was seated and is, resting under a tree, and he saw this lion. The lion was coming, and he took his bike and put it up on top of his head, holding the bike, and the lion just passed him and went. And we all laughed, said, weren't you shaking? When you saw, because some of us would have collapsed. He said, well, it's either I did that with conviction that this lion is not going to harm me, or I just collapse and then it would eat me. So he said, I was determined not to be eaten by a lion. So he put his bike on top of his head and it passed. And he said, after that, he cycled like nobody, nobody's business. So, and they tell you moments where they went without anything. But you see, they had the focus. They had the vision. And that led them. The vision was that we must be independent. Our people, we deserve more than this, what these white colonialists were giving them. So, from their style of life, of selflessness, not wanting much, and service, saving, they decided to champion all our causes, and not for themselves, but for the people. So they don't make them anymore like that, because even from our own homes, you find our children are spoiled. When they wake up, it's TV, egg and bacon breakfast. When they grow up as teenagers, they have a vehicle. Maybe we have done too much. That selflessness that worthiness, the value system. What is the value system now? It's material things. Drive the biggest vehicle and show off. With them, at that moment in time, was to serve humanity, to wake up in the morning and do a good day's job, and not to expect someone to do the job for you.
It's amazing to hear you reflect on what could have created such a character in our founding mothers and fathers. And you allow me to learn from the possibility that their biggest training school was the journey they walked, the struggle they waged. It built
Yes.
their character.
Yes, yes, yes.
Dr. Mwanawasa,
Yes, but
for 8 years, you lived in the compound and the house that Dr. Kaunda and family had called their home for over 20 years. And the Chiluba came in there to be there for 10 years. What did that experience, lived experience, teach you about power and responsibility? You saw it from within.
first of all, is to when you live in that house, you notice that Dr. Kaunda and his team had a very big vision. When you look at the structure of State House and the time when it was built, it has all the modern facilities that are found in a house that can be built in 2021. That alone showed you that when they were planning, they did not plan for now. They planned for a future. So you can see that the president and his team, President Kaunda and his team, had a long focus for this country. And that translates even the things which they did across the country. And also, it also explains the equality of distribution of the national wealth. When you go to different provincial centers, you find that buildings like the administration, the BOMA, the local courts, the governor's office, the provincial hospitals, the district hospitals had the same structures. So when you are Zambian, you look back and say, he tried with his team to ensure that no region would feel that the building in Eastern Province was different from the Central or from the South or from the East. When he decided to distribute secondary school education using the World Bank funding, the World Bank schools were distributed across the country. So that should teach us something. And we were at that time in a one-party state politics. Now we are in a multi-party democracy system. Those who have the opportunity to lead this country should take a leaf. When you are a president for all Zambians, whether they voted or they did not vote for you. Because the primary responsibility of a national leader represents God. And God is a God of fairness and equality. And you, who is representing God, must ensure that distribution of the national cake is distributed across the country, regardless of tribe, region, or someone's station in life. It is hoped that You were saying the Kaundas of those days are no longer being made. I believe they can be made because the yardstick or the framework and the inputs in that framework are there to be seen. All what one needs to do is to imitate, if possible, even improve upon what President Kaunda did, because the factors during that time in the economy, socially, scientifically, were different, but the yardstick has not changed. So it's a question of getting the baton which has been left behind and run with it.
At the very least, we should imitate. And if we dare, we can even improve upon. My Lord Bishop, you visited our late president in hospital. Maybe it was on the day or days before he passed on. Did you have the chance to exchange words with the president in those final moments? If yes, would you be able to let us in on what you talked about? If you did not, what stays with you from the last encounter you had with this towering figure?
Yes, Martin. Yes. Just before the week he died, in fact, the Sunday and the week he died, I just come back from church. And this has to be put in the context that President Kaunda was a father to all of us. And I first laid eyes on him and met him when I was 7 years old. And over these years, as I was growing up, and he knew me and what I was doing. And when I studied law and when I decided to go into the church and to train for the priesthood, he would always ask my father, how is our priest doing, and so on. And when I was ordained, and when I would come back home to Zambia, I would always see him, and he'd always say, when are you coming back? When are you coming back? So there was a closeness between him and I. We discussed faith and principles of leadership. And so the Sunday when his condition began to deteriorate, I just come back from church. And my brother Kaweche called and said that he had just received a call, and our father's condition was not good. And so I said, certainly. And so we went together. And I went there. I became the priest, and that's what happens in situations like this. And he was my son in the Lord. And so I prayed for him. We prayed together. Well, he was not able to be aware of our presence, but committing God's power upon him for healing, praying for his healing. And we stayed a little while, and later, Monday, his condition began to improve. Tuesday came and his condition was improving. Wednesday came, it was even much better, and we were all rejoicing that excellent, our dear father will soon be discharged. And then came Thursday, and as things happen in life, his condition suddenly deteriorated, and he left us. Again, I was there. I went there with the family to say now, to pray for his soul, commending his soul to his God from whence he came, that he should rest in eternal glory, thanking God for the great life that he had demonstrated, being faithful to the gifts that God had given him. And so as I looked at him, of course, in death, I could only give thanks to God for the gift of President Kaunda to us as Zambians, the gift of President Kaunda to Africa, the gift of President Kaunda to the world, and how he had been a faithful servant of God. And of course, we look back at his life And God was always at the center of his life. He taught us to love God with all our heart and to love our neighbor and as ourselves, and to do that. And my dear mother, Mrs. Alumis, talked about the incident when he encountered the lion. And in his book, Zambia Shall Be Free, there is a chapter there where he talks about the influences in his life. And one of the influences, apart from, of course, being a deep man of God, brought up as a Christian, is that he came across a book as a young politician mobilizing the nation for freedom, entitled In Tune with the Infinite. And it is a book by Ralph Waldo Trine. And basically, In Tune with the Infinite is being about in tune with God, and how his life was, in fact, about doing God's purpose. And he became an instrument of God's purpose and all that he did. An instrument, as we know, St. Francis of Assisi's prayer, make me an instrument of your peace, an instrument of your love, an instrument of your justice. And that's what his life was. So as I commended his soul to God, I thought about all those things, that indeed he had lived a righteous and good life. And I knew that in the presence of God, he was being welcomed with great joy. Well done, my good and faithful servant. And we were united with his dear wife, our mother, Mama Betty. And I thought of all that. And although we are grieved and so forth, nevertheless, we celebrate a great life. So those are the thoughts and feelings that were passing through my time when I first saw him, when his condition was deteriorating, commending him to God. And of course, when he left us, that now he has found eternal peace and God rewards him for a job well done.
Lord Bishop, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. I would like, as my final question, to ask the three of you to respond to this. What is the one story that stands out for you in your encounter with Dr. Kaunda? What is the one story that stands out for you? If you asked me, before I come to you, Mrs. Alumis, it would be that moment when I traveled with him to Malawi to give the first award to the journalist who had won the writing competition on HIV and AIDS. And I traveled with him because Oxfam asked me to ask him to go and be the guest of honor. And obviously I was traveling in the economy, and he was the only one in business class. And then one air hostess came and said, the man sitting there says he has a friend who is you sitting at the back of the plane. He asked for permission if you could go and sit next to him. And I smiled and I walked the aisle and sat opposite him. And he said, I felt lonely and I thought you needed to come and chat here. Why did you leave me alone here? I said, my ticket could only permit me to be in the economy. He said, no. I asked our colleagues here, and they said they could grant me my request. But what was sobering for me was when he said, you know, I'm aging and sometimes my feet ache. Do you mind I take off my shoes and put them on the seat next to you there? And so you can imagine how much of a wonder it was for me to see Dr. Kaunda's feet. I don't know what that means, but I sat there and I was in this moment of the flight. He was just like a grandfather. And we talked our way through. And I learned so much out of that trip. Wamwangala, what would be your one story?
Oh, well, I really have to sift through the bag, which is the story that I should really tell, because they were sad they will reflect, when I reflect on the encounters, on my experience with him, there were happy moments, perplexing moments, and sad moments. And maybe I shouldn't dwell on the sad moments. But you see, I worked with him at a time, I think he went through a very difficult time. A difficult time when, as Mrs. Mwanawasa said, it had to take President Mwanawasa to restore his status. And we were there as a group to try and fight this injustice on him, to try and make people realize what we have in our midst. And now, this recognition, or the reminder, maybe that's the one I should talk about, of how great this man was. It's when we went to Zimbabwe, there was a summit of African American Summit. And this was for Africa. The presidents came to Zimbabwe, and the Americans, Jesse Jackson and Mrs. Martin Luther King, the late, I think she's late now, she came, and all the Black Americans, all the names that we heard of, they came to Zimbabwe. And he said very little. But what struck me is that he sat on a chair quietly, and you had all these African leaders around him, at the back of him, and the Black Americans in front of him who sat on the floor and were just watching. I think Rabson Chongo was with me, and the late Wezi, and we sat down. In fact, we were asked to sit down with Dr. Kaunda didn't want to forget us. I said, no, my team must come here. We're taking pictures as well. They sat and they were singing. And all these, the African presidents in the, Uganda was there, Kenya was there, South Africa was there, Mozambique, Angola, and they were all there. And how they treated this man who was being persecuted here. And here is somebody who was globally, recognized. And they revered him. He was such, the charisma, he had a magnet about him. He didn't even say anything. He just sat there. And the recognition from his peers, the recognition from these Black Americans, and it was such a moment that I can never ever describe how I felt, and how the room, the photographers were there, and they said this is the best ever moment we would have with him, having all the African leaders whom he actually tutored, schooled, encouraged, and having these Black Americans whom he helped to try and bring peace and unity amongst themselves. So, there were also some moments of how he could identify a suffering person. You are moving and you see somebody walking in the rural areas, deep in the rural areas, and you say, stop, stop, stop. And would stop, and he comes out and say, Ulishani Mune, Ulishani, I'm okay, but I don't have this. And you just put his hands in the pocket. Whatever Dr. Kaunda had, he would give away. And I'd never met somebody who had no value for money like Dr. Kaunda. You know, whoever asked him for money, whatever he had in his pocket, he would give it away. So we decided now to try and save him from all this, because some of them were con people, con men, that when he comes to the meeting, they would ask me, you know, the late Sebastian Zulu and Masheke and Arabi, the former president, Arabi, and they say, go and ask him how much money he has and get 3/4 of it, save it for him. So I would ask him and say, we don't have money for tea and what, do you have any money? Oh, yes, Mune, I've got some money here. And you take out all his money. And I say, do you need any money yourself? He says, of course I need. What do you think if somebody comes to ask me for some, then I'll take most of it, give him a little bit and save it for later. So that's, there are so many, you know, I cannot just identify one because there are so many incidences, occasions that stand out. It's like watching a film, you know, watching a film of this great man. Yes.
And Dr. Mwanawasa, what's your one story? I know you also have many. I'm looking for one.
My one story, I'm going to make it brief. My one story is an 11-year-old girl in 1974 who was in the crowd, in the mix of young people when President Kaunda visited Kabwe, Central Province, to be specific, Chimanimani compound. When he visited a ward chairman, Mr. Saidi, I was one of the kids. Little did I know I would occupy the same house he occupied. Wow. And also that he was my birthday mate. And that on 3 occasions when he celebrated his birthday, he made sure Cheswa delivered a cake for me as well. I'm going to miss that.
Wow. Wow. Beautiful. My Lord Bishop, what's your story?
My brother, 2 short stories and humorous stories, because he was such a humorous man and great sense of humor and so on. Once, when he visited Botswana, I was in Bishop of Botswana. I took him to, there's a golf place called Pakalane. And of course, you know, he loved to play golf. So I said, Excellency, let me go show you this fascinating golf place. So we were there driving, and then we began to talk about him being a vegetarian, which I said I thoroughly found amazing that during the colonial struggle, he deliberately decided not to eat meat because of the way Africans were treated, and you had to buy meat through a little pigeonhole and all that. And then I said to him, Your Excellency, I really admire you for conviction and principles and holding on to this. And you see, here in Botswana, of course, as you know, the beef is absolutely brilliant. It's fantastic. This is exported to the EU. So I said to him, Your Excellency, I'm going to follow your example, but I'm going to wait until I'm about 80 or 90 before I become a vegetarian like you. And he just cracked up and laughed and laughed. I remember that. It was an amazing moment. And the other incident was I just come back as a priest back home, and there was a small luncheon at State House. And my uncle at the time, Mr. James Mapoma, was his economic advisor. So the president at the luncheon table looks at me and says, welcome back to Zambia, Father. And I looked at him and I said, thank you very much, my son. And my uncle, he just looked at me, thought he had lost his job. And the president just laughed. I said, yes, of course. So I remember those. May his soul rest in eternal peace. Thank you.
Amen.
Mrs. Zalumis, Dr. Mwanawasa, my Lord Bishop, thank you for being here. And I hope I won't cause offense by saying the best way to end this is not through my words, but asking you, my Lord Bishop, to say a little prayer for Dr. Kaunda and all the great men and women that served with him to take us to our liberation, but also the years past 1964.
Thank you. Let us pray. Lord God, we praise and thank you that you are our God, and we are made in your image of love, of service, of kindness, and of mercy. And so we thank you for our father, your servant, Kenneth David Kaunda. And we thank you indeed for our fathers and mothers, our founding fathers and mothers of our republic, for their devotion and dedication to people, and in fulfilling your will for the purpose of building up Zambia, prospering Zambia, making Zambia an equitable country for all, and for all that they did. Because they did all that because you directed them through the power of your Spirit at work in them. And especially now we commend the soul of your servant, Kenneth, into your gracious keeping, that him and all the faithful departed may rest in eternal peace and rise in glory. Bless Zambia, bless Africa, guide her leaders, guard her peoples, for Jesus Christ's sake. Amen.
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 Thank you, everyone. Having listened to the dialogue, I now invite you to look at the drawing that emerged out of that dialogue. Take time to see the contours, the colors, the images that are reflected on the painting, on the drawing. And pay attention to what the drawing evokes in you. What are the feelings? What are the thoughts that are ignited by you looking at the painting? What thoughts, feelings, and images does this painting evoke in you with regard to the future of our country? Kindly share your reflections on this channel so that we can continue the dialogue on the future of the country we all love, on the future of our nation.